This is breaking news.
Good afternoon. I'm Jessica Moore. It is sentencing day for Sean Diddy Combs.
And I'm Dick Brennan. We're waiting for the judge to hand down the sentence. He's currently addressing the court.
The hip-hop mogul was convicted in July of 2 prostitution-related charges. He faced a maximum of 20 years in prison. Prosecutors are asking for 11 years. Combs's legal team argued for no more than 14 months. Many people waiting to hear from everyone involved outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. These are some sketches from earlier in the day.
And that's where we find Ali Bauman. Ali, they're waiting right now for the sentencing, so there's got to be a lot of drama playing out on those streets, correct?
Yeah, Dick and Jessica, we are standing here waiting with bated breath for the judge to announce the sentencing for Sean Diddy Combs. There's a crowd right in front of me on the other side of the camera, as well as behind me here. Obviously, a large amount of media, as well as some of his supporters out here. So the judge is currently speaking to the court right now. This comes after like a 6-hour-long hearing for this sentencing. The judge saying on behalf, in regards to the defense's comments that they were making today, that he is impressed with all of the work that Sean Diddy Combs has been doing while in prison for the past year in his incarceration, working with some of his fellow inmates there, saying that there is no doubt that he loves his family, but at the same time he sees the evidence and that he has done irreparable harm to the women in his life, the 2 ex-girlfriends that testified in court, specifically Jane as well as his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura. He says there are serious offenses that irreparably harmed these 2 women, and even after the Cassie video went public, the judge said that video that came out from CNN of Diddy seeming to beat Cassie into the hotel room. He said that Diddy once again did something similar with Jane shortly after that video went public. Now, throughout this day, the prosecution has been trying to paint Diddy as someone who is unrepentant, saying that he is downplaying the violence that he had inflicted onto women in his life, as well as saying that they were asking for an 11-year sentence on these 2 counts. The defense, meanwhile, spent a long time, several hours in court, painting a picture of Combs as a repentant and deeply sorry father and man. Combs spoke, he was the last person to speak on behalf of the defense, saying that he was sorry and changed in court. So we're waiting here to see what the verdict will be. Dick and Jessica?
All right, Ali, thank you. And we've just learned, in fact, the judge handed down a sentence of 50 months for Sean Diddy Combs, less than what prosecutors wanted, but much more than his defense team wanted.
Much in that target range, that central target range that we were talking about. People were talking about 5 to 7 months. And that would be what a judge would do, we presume, when he doesn't want the sentence to be perhaps overturned on an appeals court. And it would seem somewhere in the middle is always the safest approach.
Absolutely. Let's bring in Rich Schoenstein. He is the expert on all things, everything related to these trials. Rich, I have never in my life seen a sentencing display like we saw today, right? More people spoke from the defense side today than they did during the trial. Diddy wrote a letter to the judge. They played this edited, basically a mini documentary showing what a family man and philanthropist he was. And then he did address the court. Was any of that impactful?
Everybody got a turn. It was like a wedding where everybody stands up and makes a toast. I don't think ultimately it was impactful. I assume the judge knew what the sentence was going to be going into today, and at the end of the day, that is the sentence. I thought some of what was said was helpful. I thought some of what was said wasn't helpful. Overall, I thought there was too much.
It does strike you as odd that a man who didn't put up a defense, didn't put up a single witness, 30-minute defense practically, and then the entire day is spent on this. I always sit there when I'm sitting in federal court waiting for a decision and waiting for all these different arguments being made. Does the judge just have one ruling and then he says, okay, I mean, you get the impression that maybe, oh, I'm going to do this if he says that. Is that really realistic?
No, I think more often than not, the judge knows what the sentence is going to be walking in. Remember, there's a whole separate purpose of the sentencing. It's to give a voice to the victims. It's to give a voice to the family members. It's to let all of them address the public, which they got to do. And that's accomplished no matter what the sentence is. But I don't really believe those events fundamentally moved the judge.
Can we talk about the acquitted conduct, the things that Combs was acquitted of? much more serious charges. Does the judge take that into consideration, though, when sentencing him or any defendant on lesser charges?
Well, the judge had to walk a line here because you're not really supposed to consider the crimes on which he was acquitted. That would be manifestly unfair. But some of the conduct, like the violence against women, is still baked into and an underpinning of the charges he was convicted on, because it wasn't just transporting prostitutes across state lines. It was the acts that were committed when they got there, and some of those were real violent.
Now, we haven't heard as of yet as to whether he'd be walking out the door, but I would think it was almost inconceivable that he wouldn't just get the sentence beginning right now in a federal court, correct?
Right.
There would be no idea that sometimes you're let out on appeal. But
oh, no. He's not going to be let out on appeal. It's far too significant a crime for him to be let out on appeal. The sentence will be imposed. He will be incarcerated. Hopefully, he'll be moved to a real prison other than the holding center where he's been, and that should proceed.
Can we talk a little bit about the prosecution witness who testified under the pseudonym Mia? There was a lot of legal back and forth about whether she would be allowed to give a victim impact statement today. The judge ultimately agreed that she would be. She, at the last minute, decided not to, because she said the defense painted her as a liar and that she did not want to subject herself to that kind of treatment. Cassie Ventura wrote this letter to the judge saying she'll never feel safe if Combs is out of jail. Were these things contributory to the judge's final decision?
I don't know exactly what led to the judge's final decision, but I would think he might have been bothered by the sense that there was witness intimidation going on. You heard about that throughout this case,
right?
That it even continued once Sean Combs was in jail, and that kind of thing very much bothers any judge and would be considered.
You know, you're looking at this case right now. It's another case of celebrity. We've seen a lot of them. We have the Mangione case, which has sort of become a pseudo-celebrity almost. We see the people lining the courtroom outside. Has the way justice changed because of the way people are reacting to these big cases that are perhaps going all across the internet and all across the tweeting, et cetera, and so forth?
I get asked this question a lot, especially about Mangione, and I remind people Bonnie and Clyde had fans, right? But what they didn't have is the internet. They didn't have social media. They couldn't crowdsource, right, funding for their defense like people can now. There weren't all of these analysts, myself included, running around, content makers, you know, making a buck off of this stuff. So it's just become louder.
Yeah.
But those themes of support for people on trial, that's always been with us.
The Robin Hood robbing the bank,
right,
exactly. Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, et cetera.
Well, and speaking of content makers, we saw in our noon show, TikTokers, podcasters, you have all these influencers outside the courtroom. Their whole life is sort of covering this trial. And so because of that, the input, the speculation is even greater. I did want to ask you about one thing. You mentioned the judge cannot base his sentence on things for which the defendant was acquitted. However, he made it really clear you're only being sentenced for the offenses regarding the Mann Act. A lot of people may not know exactly what that is. Can you kind of explain what the Mann Act is and how that led to the sentence?
The Mann Act is a federal statute prohibiting transporting across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. That's what he was convicted of. He wasn't convicted of being a John or being a pimp or anything like that. He was, I'm sorry, he was convicted for transporting people across state lines to engage in prostitution.
But the bigger question here, I think, for the prosecution is that there was so much criticism of perhaps overreaching. Now that the sentence is out there, how do you rate how the prosecution, quote unquote, did? Because that's what they're thinking right now. Is this they're not pretty much not close to the sentence that they wanted either?
Yeah. Well, you have to keep in mind the prosecution went into this case looking to put Sean Combs in prison for the rest of his life. So he got a sentence of 50 months. And by the way, I think that's a victory for the defense team, right? 50 months, 4 years.
It's a little lower than the central, yeah.
It's lower than the sentencing guidelines.
Credit for time served.
He's credit for time served. Now you're 3 years. He might get some more credit if he keeps up the good conduct in jail. That's a win for the defense. And when you consider that the prosecution wanted him never to leave a prison for the rest of his life, it's actually a huge win.
So on that note, does this sentence, in your opinion, strike the balance between fairness and punishment?
Yes. I think it does. Well, first of all, you can tell because it's somewhat in the middle of what the defense suggested, which was 14 months, and what the prosecution suggested, which was 11 years. And everybody who looked at this thought we were going to end up in the middle. This is a little lower. I thought we were going to maybe get in that 70 to 87 month.
Well, he was pretty strong in his wording, the judge, this morning. We were all commenting. It seemed like maybe he was going to go toward that higher end.
Yeah, it did. It did. I thought maybe we would get the higher end. I thought it would be in that range. But, you know, another thing is 3 or 4 years in prison is no joke.
Right.
I mean, that is a significant sentence.
And he's been there already. Right. You know, he's been there. He's been wanting to get out. He couldn't get out. Just back to the judge for a second, though, because we do see federal judges sometimes give the big speech, say you did this, this, and this, and then you're like, wait a minute, it sounds like you were coming around and hitting him harder. The idea that we talked about, you know, the Cassie Ventura, the beating tape, et cetera. So even though that's not a part of the case, the defense against him, the case against him in the conviction, we still see that it might be part of the sentencing because the judge mentioned it, right?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, the violence against Cassie and Jane, because they are part of the Mann Act violations, so the violence does count. The judge can reference that and can look at that. And the general violence towards women.
And he did in his point, yeah.
And he was moved by that, and he should have been.
Talk to me a little bit about, so he fell within the sentencing guidelines. The judge went within the sentencing guidelines. What does it say for future cases involving high-profile defendants about how they will be treated?
Well, he fell lower, right? The guidelines were 70
oh, that's right, 5 to 7.
Central
5 to 7.
Slight,
So
very slight, though.
Well, it's 20 months lower. I mean, that's almost 2 years lower.
But it's not 11, right? Yeah,
right. Okay. So my question has even more merit then. So what does it say about powerful figures who are found guilty of these violations and then get less than the sentencing guidelines?
One thing it says, and I sort of hate to concede this, is that if you hire an excellent defense team, and this defense team was excellent and large and had no expense spared in getting witnesses and making arguments and making legal arguments, and they performed brilliantly, that is going to inure to your benefit.
And we also have an era now where people literally get cheering sections, going back to Mangione. Do you think that stuff, you know, especially federal court, they will always say it doesn't come in these doors. But I remember during the Trump case just last year, you could actually hear people outside when you were in the courtroom, people cheering outside. And you have to wonder whether that sound comes into the halls of justice.
Well, you worry about it affecting the jury much more than you worry about it affecting the judge. The judge will ordinarily say and will really try to treat each defendant the same. Human nature, though, if you have a case that's being watched, being reported on CBS every day, you know, you're going to maybe up your game a little bit or act a little bit differently. But I think this judge, Judge Subramanian, is excellent and did an excellent job in this case, whether or not you agree exactly with the result. But it's hard to keep out those voices.
Well, and as you and I were talking about earlier today, it might have also been part of the reason that he let this go on so long. He didn't want either side to feel like they were being cut short.
Absolutely.
Right, in their final, shouldn't be final arguments, but this sort of, in a way, was their final appeal, right, to the judge.
This was much longer than your average sentencing hearing, or even in any I can really think of. But he did want to give everybody an opportunity to be heard, and he did that.
Just to recap, Sean Diddy Combs is 50 months in prison. Where do we go from here? It's likely this prison sentence is going to start anymore, but the appeals are going to start rather quickly, or do the wheels of justice always grind slowly?
Well, I think they have probably have an appeal in process already, so they have to figure out exactly what they're appealing, and that's a big strategy decision for the lawyers. Do you pick a few specific things, or do you do a kitchen sink appeal where you appeal everything that you think went wrong at the trial?
Right.
They have to get that fully submitted and briefed before the Second Circuit. That's got to be briefed in opposition by the prosecution. It's got to be heard by that court. That seems to me likely to take a year beginning to end or thereabouts.
You mentioned earlier that he may be moved to a different prison. And I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have any sort of speculation about where he might serve this prison term?
I don't know. I'm not really an expert on the different facilities. He is in MDC, which is a holding facility. He referenced being in a room with 20-plus other people being held, and it's a bad place.
Well, that was a huge part of his appeal to the judge, talking about the unlivable conditions where he's being held.
I didn't like that. You know, the idea that jail is bad, yes, it's bad for everyone. The idea that I have children, yes, a lot of inmates have children. A lot of his themes were too run-of-the-mill to get him anywhere. But he'll be moved to probably a minimum security facility. I don't think anybody thinks he's a huge risk and needs, you know, maximum security.
All right, he did make his plea in court, and let's hear some of Sean Diddy Combs, what he said in court. We have some of the quotes. I got lost in excess. I lost in my ego. I want to personally apologize again to Cassie Ventura for any harm I caused for her emotionally and physically.
I also want to personally apologize, Combs said, to all of the victims of domestic violence. All right, we're going to go back out live now to Allie Bauman. She is live outside the federal courthouse now that this sentence of 50 months has been handed down. Allie, I'm wondering, do we have Allie? There we go. There's Allie. So, Allie, what kind of response are you hearing? What's the chatter there on the street for a lot of these supporters who've been waiting all day long to find out this decision?
Yeah, I have to say, I know Dick was referencing how you can really hear from inside the courtroom the people outside. I can't imagine they really heard anything out here. The large crowd of people, I'm not sure if the news hasn't gotten to them yet. There hasn't been much of a reaction out here, very much at all, that we've been seeing. But I want to talk a little bit about the judge's comments when he was giving that sentence, because he really had us waiting, you know, for quite a while on the edge of our seats as the judge was talking before he actually imposed that 50-month sentence. He said that he reminded Combs that he is being sentenced for the Mann Act, which is transporting for acts of prostitution, and not the sex trafficking charges for which he was acquitted back in July. But he said even though he's not being sentenced for those sex trafficking charges, the judge is still required to take into consideration the nature and the circumstance of the offense and the history and the characteristics of the defendant. And this whole day was about the history and characteristics of the defendants, the defense trying to paint him as someone with a long history of accomplishments as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, as a philanthropist. And the judge acknowledged that he is impressed with Combs's history, as well as what he's been doing the past year in prison, which is running a class for some of his fellow inmates in that prison on entrepreneurship, on business and life skills. But he said he still has to acknowledge that that does not wipe away the crimes that he has committed, and said that that undoubtedly Combs abused women physically and emotionally with his money and power, women, he said, who relied on him and who loved and trusted him. And the judge said that he rejected the defense's attempt to characterize some of what happened in those freak-offs as just sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and said that he has done irreparable damage to those women. And so he said that in saying, as the prosecution was trying to paint during today, that Combs was unrepentant, that's what they were trying to paint him as, the judge said that there gave some credit to that, gave some merit to that, saying that after that video of him beating Cassie in the California hotel went public, he physically abused the second victim in this case, Jane, as well, showing that he had not in some ways been repentant for those actions. Now, after he gave that 15-month sentence, the judge then spoke directly or addressed Cassie Ventura, his ex-girlfriend, and Jane directly, thanking them for coming forward and for being brave enough to speak out, saying that they gave light to what has happened. They stood up to the powerful, and they also gave a voice to other victims of domestic violence. And then he turned to Combs, and he addressed Combs and said that while he acknowledges that he is in a dark place right now, clearly in a dark place, he then pointed to all the letters of support that Combs had received, all the character testimonials that they had submitted on behalf of him today from people that he had worked with in the past, from his family members, as well as some of his fellow inmates. And the judge said that those letters showed that there are people that still love and care about you. So he really spoke to all sides. It kind of speaks to that attempt in a way to strike a balance with the four-year sentence of somewhere in the middle of what the one side wanted, which was 11 years, versus the other side, which was 14 months there. Dick and Jessica?
Alman, who's live outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Allie, thank you.
Sean Diddy Combs sentenced to 50 months in prison for the 2 Mann Act violation charges, and much less than the prosecution wanted, much more than his team wanted. Thank you for watching this special report on the sentencing of Sean Diddy Combs.
CBS News New York at 5 begins right now.